Thank you, Jason, for the invite to participate in the conference and present. So apparently I have a pretty interesting topic, and I started to get that sense actually as I was preparing for this topic. I have to say too, normally I get, like most people, I would get nervous in a public presentation setting, but noting that my audience of all people is Maritime chaplains and ministers, I think this is a pretty safe crowd, and I'm not nervous. So, you're probably praying for me, though. Yeah, we'll see. Okay, obviously this is a pretty important topic for this audience in particular. So Seafarers Access, a new regulatory project, and I'll introduce that in a moment. But before I talk too much about a specific regulatory project, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk a little bit more globally and high level about the Coast Guard's missions, the various missions, and then how that eventually generates into regulatory projects and frameworks. So the Coast Guard, as you might know, is quite busy with a broad spectrum of missions. We'd like to try to, there's 11 statutory that Congress requires us to execute statutory missions, you know, from things you would recognize from search and rescue, pollution response, drug interdiction, and so on. But taking those 11 themes or mission sets, we'd like to chunk them into 3 main mission sets of maritime safety, security, and stewardship. So when I talk to this, I like to use a Venn diagram to show the interoperability and relationships across these missions. For aids to navigation, the same cutter that is laying down buoys for mark the channels. That's also now helping for a safer port. There's less marine casualties. That helps promote, the environmental protection and so on. You could have the same Coast Guard helicopter rescue somebody someday, and then later on in the afternoon, you might do an overflight for pollution or law enforcement interdiction. So there's all multi-connected. So it keeps us quite busy and have to interact internally with each other quite a bit. So that's one way to describe Coast Guard missions. And then I thought, well, I can just show you a bunch of pictures, and that's how we do the missions. Things, assets, people, and obviously working together to promote marine safety, security, and stewardship. So obviously we're pretty busy with all sorts of things, but in order for us to execute these missions, well, we kind of need the mandates, the direction, and the authority to execute them. And so that comes from law. Congress makes the laws, executed by the president. And then, like any other agencies given that kind of direction and tasking authorization from Congress, we now have to implement those requirements. So there's sort of a pathway to get there to implement the final rules. So it's the typical rulemaking process. It starts with legislation given to an agency to execute, and then the agency has to describe how they're going to verify compliance and what exactly the requirements. Congress might say something kind of broad. Sometimes they get specific too, but it's up to agency to articulate more exactly how to carry out that requirement Congress is looking for. So in a typical rulemaking process, as you can see, there's a scoping document based on the new legislation. A work plan is produced, and then, very important, agency has to provide public notice and make it the requirements available for comment by the public. Those comments get evaluated, and then eventually there's a final rule. And then these final rules get published into our CFRs. The Code of Federal Regulations implement the code, the law. So keep it in mind, all the various functions that the Coast Guard executes. That means we have a lot of regulations that we're maintaining, updating, producing for the first time. And this is a list. I believe it gets updated every fall, so looking for an update in the next few months. But I counted them, there's like 20 reg projects ongoing right now, and it runs the spectrum. You probably can't read them, but it's running things from security to vessel equipment standards. But what's encouraging is to implement a system that provides seafarers and other individuals with access to vessels in a timely manner and at no cost to the seafarer or other individual. I'll get to this a little further, but basically it implements a mandate from Congress as articulated in Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2010. The Federal Register was published in late December 2014. There was a public meeting for comment in January of 2015. Comment period ended in July 15. Over 163 comments were received by the Coast Guard, and currently the regulatory team is reviewing those comments, and a final rule is in progress. ETA, well, as we know, ETAs, I'm not permitted to specifically, I have some insight, but I can't specifically hold anybody accountable because ETAs are always a moving target because these reg projects have to go through many layers, call it bureaucracy if you want, of approval. But it's on the horizon. It really is. How many months, plus and minus, but it's coming. So, quick background for those who may not be familiar is how did we get here with this new rule? Understand that one of the Coast Guard's missions in the maritime industry, of course, important to the industry, is security. The Maritime Transportation Security Act, 2003, implemented 2004. At the heart and a key element in security for facilities and vessels is access control. I think we heard that earlier, the importance of access control. That's how you want to make sure. I think you mentioned access control, cybersecurity. Who is in your facility, on your vessel? What mechanics or machinery or computers are they engaging with? So it's a very important issue. So we have to know who's authorized for access control. They have to be escorted by somebody who's already been vetted. You might have heard of the TWIC card requirements. Okay, yeah. If you don't have a TWIC, then you need to be escorted. And all this has to be articulated by the facility or the vessel operator in their plans. Now, when the MTSA was originally written, and still today, the current regs, and I'll get to a little bit more next, required and facilities to have access provisions in their plans. But what happened over the years, it wasn't quite implemented. I guess you can call the intent or the well-meaning intent of the regulations wasn't exactly executed by all facilities. Estimates, according to the Federal Register, was about 10% of facilities were not executing their mandate to allow free available access. It's a balance between, like many things, it's a balance between access, security, and money. And facilities were charging mariners, they were delaying mariners, or they were just not facilitating leave at all, which is very disruptive. All right, maybe too much to throw up on a screen here, but I'm comparing here the existing reg as it is now and how the proposed reg is to be established. And there's a few differences here, and I'll just point them out. Rather than just mandate facilities allow access for crew change out, and it's kind of an agreement between the vessel and the facility before the vessel arrives. It's implementing very specific provisions in in very certain terms what Congress mandated in the Coast Guard Authorization Act, which really was about Congress asked for timely, at no cost access. And that's what these rules are providing. Try to summarize a new 33 CFR 105-237, it's a new subpart, requires essentially a number of things that are very specific. Requires access. MTSA facilities must have procedures in place to allow access through the facility. B, individuals covered. It's very specific and provides a longer list of which individuals are afforded this kind of access. Seafarers and crew, and this audience would be glad to hear, including seafarers, welfare, and labor organizations. The access has to be timely, but of course time is kind of a relative term. So I think the regs talk to that quite a bit. The Captain of Port discretion and almost has to break the tie there. Access methods, it's up to the facility of how they're going to make this work. They decide, but they have to meet the mandates of timely and no cost. No cost to the individuals. No cost means no cost. Okay, you can't make somebody pay for something that they are afforded to by law. And all this needs to be described in the approved facility security plan. Execution, once the final rule comes out, essentially all facilities need to implement these new requirements within 1 year. Okay. So I've been talking about the rule. If you want to find more information, and specifically the Federal Register that published the proposed rule, you can find that all here on regulations.gov. Maybe a little hazy, I apologize. Maybe I should adjust the resolution on my screen. But what you can see here, it provides it provides a copy of the rule itself, supporting primary documents, and then also, as you can see to the right, 163 comments, and it also, below this, I had to cut and paste the screenshot, but below this is also list all the comments that are on the docket for public viewing. And your organization specifically submitted a comment in favor of the rule. So you can view that there as well as the other ones. I didn't do an exhaustive search of all the comments. The ones that I looked at random seem to be very supportive of it. So we hope that that this regulatory project is making its way. In closing, just kind of grabbing a few themes that we heard already from previous speakers. I think this regulatory project provides hope, and very important four-letter word, towards improving a very important aspect in what you do as in service to the seafarers, and that's seafarers access. That's what I have. Thank you.